You know, that statue of John A. Macdonald was desecrated.
Desecrated. Sacrilegious. F me. That's so funny.
Well, at the same time, Justin Trudeau was pitching this idea of a post-national state. Well, how is that
Literally the opposite
going? Trudeau's erasing Canadian history to achieve his post-national vision.
Well, this is a statue thing? We're talking about statues? You're one of those guys. You're one of the, we should leave up the statues in the South, the Confederate figures that we put up in the 60s during Jim Crow to intimidate black people and then claim that they shouldn't be removed because they've always been there. Is this what's going on here? This is difficult for me because I grew up in Canada as a white guy, right? I got all the propaganda. I got it in my heart. I got the, you know, I want a maple leaf tattoo or something. And some years ago, not enough years ago, but some years ago, I had a real reckoning with that. I think it was a few years ago. It was when when they started finding all those mass graves at the residential schools. It was within a year or two, I think. Time is a flat circle. I don't fucking know. But I think it was within a year or two of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and all that stuff. And I think I was listening to more radicalizing progressive media and stuff. And I started thinking a lot more about colonialism and genocide. God damn it. I showed on stream, possibly last time, the Gord Hill book of 500 Years of Indigenous Resistance. And I was turned on to him by seeing in Victoria a pamphlet in one of the used bookstores. It was very hippy-dippy, beyond my personal scope of hippy-dippy. But there was a wall of pamphlets, and I picked up one that looked interesting, and it was something about Sacred Way, the Warriors of Shambhala thing, but something about Indigenous warrior spirit. And it was like a pamphlet about colonialism. And it really opened my eyes. There was a lot that I knew factually as somebody into history, but there were different takes on it that I hadn't considered before. The one thing I remember sticking out was the idea that we think of Rome and the Roman Empire as being a contiguous identity. And it was talking about how Rome was the original colonial power and how all through France and Germany and Italy, North Africa, more local to Italy, Germany, France. Before the Roman Empire, all these places had very distinct regional, ethnic, and cultural identities that Rome rolled through and conquered, and yes, possibly incorporated some of their culture and identity into themselves, as conquering powers inevitably do. But it was the point that those identities were erased and lost from history, and they're just gone, never to be known. And that's true genocide. I mean, killing massive amounts of people is obviously horrible, and in the near term, obviously worse, but it just made me, it made me sad. Because I flashed like several hundred years into the future. And that's what I saw. That from that vantage point, we would look back and say, yeah, there used to be other ethnic groups here, I think. And they'd just be erased. And that kind of radicalized me. And it made me angry. And it made me incredibly sympathetic to First Nations people and their causes and their problems. And it made me want to go and join one of their protest encampments. I haven't. Part cowardice, part having family that wouldn't let me. But you know, when the Ukraine thing happened, my uncle was saying if his wife hadn't held him back, he's ex-military, and he was saying if it hadn't been for his obligations at home, he'd have grabbed his gun and gone to fight. And that's sort of the same spirit I had when I realized just how horrific, not just what had been done to the Indigenous people, but what is continuing to be done and what end game is being worked towards. So yeah, coming way back around, I grew up in Canadian schools, and I was taught reverence for, I don't know if this is the person, but for, you know, John A. Macdonald and Canadian history and all the stuff that we want to write in the history books, and carefully avoiding all the shit that we don't want in the history books. So yeah, I don't have a lot of sympathy for people who think that we shouldn't have statues commemorating positively leaders of genocide. Call me crazy. Call me a blue-haired lib fascist. I don't give a shit. Now, am I a tear down the statues guy? No. I think the statues we have erected in the past to commemorate historical figures are as much a part of history as the people they are meant to commemorate. If this is a John A. Macdonald statue, I don't think it should be torn down. I think it should be made into an exhibit where there are plaques or some sort of other learning medium for a better contextual understanding of the person's life and what they did. Not just good and bad. Like, say, yes, for this person was an important figure in advancing the formation and growth of Canada as a nation state. In the process, they were responsible and complicit in all these horrible things, which probably wasn't worth it, or similar aims could have been gone about in a better way. So that's where I'm coming from.
Vision writes, the Niagara Independent. I'll leave a link in the description down below. You can go.
Oh, let's have a look. Let's have a look. The Niagara Independent. Let's see. Yeah. Since taking power in 2015, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his allies have systematically sought to, at best, minimize and at worst, expunge everything that makes Canada a unique and laudable nation. I wonder what political perspective this article is coming from. Let's skim this. There is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada when it comes to our national identity. That is a fundamental tenet of multiculturalism. The whole premise of multiculturalism is that there is no supremacy to culture, that we welcome as a nation, people having their own cultural, not oases, not ghettos. And I've never thought of it as the point being to have multiple cultures adjacent to each other walled off. I always understood it as, I grew up in Richmond, BC, where my favorite local joke, which maybe I shouldn't say on stream, but I say it with love. My favorite local joke was always, what's the fastest way from India to China? The Alex Fraser Bridge. And I feel I can say that because I lived in Surrey and Richmond, but I think as a white dude, that's just never really appropriate. I rely a lot on people just understanding that I'm not at all racist when I tell questionable jokes like that. But I think with that one, I think Indian and Chinese people who live in Richmond and Surrey would find the joke just as funny as I do. The point is, I grew up around a lot of Chinese people. I went to school with a lot of Chinese people. And so my conception of what multiculturalism is and the point of multiculturalism was that they were before we had this expression, but a safe space for people coming from another culture to feel safe and secure in their own culture. And yeah, maybe the people who came first generation, who are already, older adults, maybe they never had it in them to want to learn English too good or assimilate too much. And they were coming because they wanted a better life and something different for their family, for their children, for their children's children. And I've always had this conception of, well, there's actually two different lanes, but just that first generation often would not assimilate very much, or they would try, but there were limitations. And then their children, a lot of whom I grew up with, would grow up with a foot in each world. They'd grow up, a foot, in Chinese culture at home, a foot in Canadian culture, such as it is in school. And then by the time they grew up and had children, they would, that third generation, they would be, a conscious effort was often and would have to be made to keep them have any contact with their original foreign heritage, because by the time they grew up with, largely local Canadian parents in a Canadian environment, they're fucking Canadians. They might have been made to learn their parents' and grandparents' native tongue when they're children, but they're Canadians. They speak English. They're just as much a part of the culture as I am. And that was always my conception of having these, not siloed, I don't like the word siloed, but you know what I mean, segregated, God, of having separate-ish cultural communities. The point was that they went in there and they lived that way, and they continuously spit out Canadians, for lack of a better way of putting it. The other lane I was going to talk about is just unrelated to this, but the conception that, well, it is kind of related, because the conception that is that people would, first-generation immigrants, so we're not talking about, I'm trying to not include the people who are, I guess if I really think about parents of the people I'm talking about, young adults to middle-aged, first-generation people come to this country, they have to bring in their parents. And it's their parents, usually, who couldn't be bothered to learn the language or assimilate themselves all that much. And that's fine. They're old. I probably wouldn't want to do that when I was old. But they're brought there to be with their family, to be kept safe in this wonderfully safe country. And then in the primary generation, the adults are some of the hardest working people in the country because they're hungry. They want it. They had the gumption to figure out how to get here. Speaking of 11 million people that aren't coming are the people who had the gumption and initiative to suffer horrors and trials that I can't even imagine, let alone think I could survive. Well, I'm a survivor, but hardships I wouldn't wish on almost anybody. And they suffered that to come here for the chance to work for a better life. And those people are the hardest working motherfuckers that we have. Just continuing to finish the thought about the second lane is that the problem is, it's not a problem, but just it's the same phenomenon of their children are above average for hard work, generally speaking, as much as they, and in the same way that they're, 1 foot in common Canadian culture, 1 foot in their country of origins culture. And then by the time to the third generation, they are really fully Canadian, and that also means that they're just as lazy as your average Canadian, and that immigrant work attitude. Why can't I find words today? Immigrant work ethic is as lost as every other aspect of their progenitors. So yeah, so this isn't true. And if he said it, I'm sure they're quoted out of context. And if this is exactly what he meant, I disagree, in the sense that even when I would describe a certain common Canadian culture, that is still just one of the cultures that we have in this country. And that's great. It makes it interesting. I love ethnic food. Oh yeah, I spent a lot of time in Kelowna, BC. And you don't notice it when you're there, but when you come back to Vancouver and walk around, you really notice the difference. And then when you get used to things here and you go there, you look around, you're like, whoa, there's an awful lot of white people around here. And you get used to that. And it's an incredibly white place. And that's gradually changing. But I was just going to say that I like coming here. I like going on the SkyTrain. I like walking around Vancouver. And I like seeing all different kinds of people. It's not scary to me like it is for reactionary conservatives. It makes me happy to look around and see all different sorts of people getting on and living with each other and making it work as best we can. I talk about one of the distinctions between conservatives and progressives being whether or not they believe in the project. What's the project? I'll tell you what the project. The project is humanity in getting on together, in making it work, as I said. Fundamentally, that's what progressive and conservative means. Progressive and regressive. I want Star Trek. I grew up watching Star Trek. I've been severely disillusioned over the last 10 years, 15 years, whatever. But I want to work towards a better future. I want to work towards us figuring out how to build a better society and a better civilization and a better world for everybody. And that's what makes me definitionally a progressive. Regressives, aka conservatives, aka hogs, aka also the flatly evil ones who manipulate the hogs into all being part of the conservative movement, they want the opposite. They're scared and fearful, and they want to secure more for themselves at the expense of everyone else, because that's the only way they can understand things. I am a straight white guy in Canada. The only thing I don't have is money and a family. But for pretty much anybody in the world, save wealthy people, anybody doing better kind of necessarily means I do a little worse. And that's what they're afraid of. This guy. That's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of what limited they have being taken away and given to somebody they think doesn't deserve it. And I will never forget, I wish I could remember where I heard it, but the expression, when you have privilege, equality feels like oppression. And understanding that, I understand that I'm going to have to give a little for other people to have more so that we can move towards the middle. That being said, we could all have a lot more if we dealt with the actual people, the ultra wealthy. I've always said I'm not at all worried about the 1%. I'm worried about the 0.01%. 1% are generally working people. We're talking, two specialist doctors who are married and pool their resources are probably in the 1%. I'm not worried about them. I'm worried about the people who we don't even know about. The people, I dare say, who manipulate things so that politicians do this shit. Bringing in the scammy work visas because they want cheap labor. Right? They want to be able to bring in people they can use and abuse and then send away before they actually demand any rights or privileges or anything that's coming to them. When you're in a position of privilege, equality feels like oppression. And if we dealt with the people who psychotically hoard resources, I also love the expression, every billionaire's a policy failure. Because these people, and I know it's a little more complicated in Canada because it's not like we have, dozens and dozens of billionaires the way the United States does, but and it's also why I just cannot stay on a tangent. That's why we need global class consciousness, because the guy working for a living in Bangladesh should be my ally against the people who are making him work for pennies a day and who are trying to shitify my healthcare so that I think private is necessary. Like, we should be on the same team. And if we were, I wouldn't have to lose so everyone else gain. They could gain up to my level and we'd all be great. Are we gonna keep reading this? Woke progressivism. Yeah, this is definitely a impartial, nuanced, well-considered article and publication. So yes, we should definitely be listening to anything these motherfuckers have to say. The origin is a woke progressivism that projects Western culture of a hierarchy of power, one of oppressors and oppressed. Yeah, guilt-based, where success is achieved through force and authority is undeserving. Yeah, where's the lie? Yes. Oh, sorry, I have to read it. I don't want to read it. This is a bunch of bullshit. They're saying the liberals and their woke government are saying all these things that are true and it's hurting our fifis. Yeah. Chris George, Motherfucker. Let's see. Provides discreet counsel, tactical advice, and management skills to CEOs, presidents, board directors, and senior executives. Yeah, so he's team owners. He's team fuck you. He is team the class we should be against and be fighting against. And eating, frankly. God, this is horrible. That's science for invoking. Right, let's get back to this.
Oh, read this article. It's great. This is
it's great. It's real great.
In Canada, you know, that statue of John A. Macdonald was desecrated, but it was also pulled
desecrated. Sacrilegious. F me. That's so funny.
Down and decapitated.
Desecrated. So what? It's a statue. What? I don't understand. Well, this is another hallmark of conservatism, is the worship of symbols instead of any consideration of why are people feeling this way? Why are they feeling the need to do that? Can we think about that? No. I remember when Trudeau was running before he won an election, and he was talking about, he said in some interview, I think with regards to terrorism, he said, we need to examine the root causes of why people do this and why they become this way. Excuse me. And the hog conservatives, including Harper himself, found this an opportunity to mock him. Like, trying to understand and know things. What a cuck. What a woman. Right? No, we don't want to understand things. We just want to impose our will. We just want to have our ideology and force other people to live by it, and them. They hate us because they hate us.